careers are not necessarily linear, but some of the threads that excite you and develop you in your career can be linear and you don't know it. And so while I'm hopping around from like, okay, wait, you're in Vermont, then you're in the resort industry, and now you're over, at a small tech firm in Chicago, then you're doing this, now you're at IBM. It might not make sense, but if you follow sort of the content thread, it's like, are you interested in marketing? Okay, the best marketing is technology-enabled marketing. And then while I was doing tech consulting, I found that being in front of clients was my favorite part of it.
I'm Sam McKenna, and you're listening to the Show Me You Know Me show, a deep dive on the impact of personal connection and empathy from the perspective of some of the world's most successful executives. Our guest today is Danny Dunn, Chief Revenue Officer of Morningstar. Hi, everyone. I met today's guest, Danny Dunn, quite a while back. I actually had the very good fortune of being one of the keynote speakers for Morningstar's annual sales kickoff right at the height of the pandemic. And I can't even tell you how impressed I was with Danny. I had a chance to get to know him a little bit better, to talk about sales, and I just couldn't wait to get more time with him. Lo and behold, it took me a few years to get there, but Danny was gracious enough to accept our invite to be on our podcast, and I can't wait to tell you more. Danny is the Chief Revenue Officer of Morningstar and responsible for all the firm's global revenue and client-facing functions, including marketing, sales, client solutions, customer success, field operations, services, and support. Holy moly. Before joining Morningstar, Danny was Vice President of IBM's Midwest Enterprise Unit, where he led sales and marketing strategy for the complete IBM portfolio. He spent the early part of his career navigating the emergence of digital marketing and capitalized on those learnings to explore new opportunities within the field. If he sounds all business, I can tell you Danny loves being outdoors more than anything. His hobbies include skiing, running, fly fishing, golfing, and a whole lot of other things that I am terrible at, although I'm a pretty decent skier. Danny's an incredible leader, incredible person, and he's got a lot of wisdom to share. More than anything, I'm excited for you guys to hear Danny's perspective, not only on Show Me You Know Me and sales, but the creative ways that he navigated his career's progress. Okay, so Danny, I heard that you were a legit ski bum after college, but before we get to that, you landed that job by prioritizing some of your personal hobbies and mountain living goals first. Tell us about that and how that led you ultimately to this role.
Oh, nice. We're going back to some really fun history. I like that, Sam. So leaving the University of Vermont, I was kind of passionate in studying environmental and natural resource sciences, but I'd also kind of combined curriculum with business. And in my mind at that age, I was pretty young, I thought, wow, what if I could combine a career in sort of the outdoors with business acumen or something like that? And so I went about it. I'd done a couple internships at ski resorts in Vermont, and I found myself looking at opportunities in Colorado, and I landed at Crested Butte Mountain Resort, which was a glorious few years. And I started as a database marketing specialist, kind of networked my way in there. I'd look out the window and, there was a ski mountain, and on my office wall was a pair of downhill skis as well as a Gary Fisher mountain bike. So that was kind of a good combo of outdoor passion and advance your career.
You got this job, though, by basically doing what we talk about all the time. You should network your buns off. Your network is your net worth, right? So how did you go about getting a job, which I suspect was probably pretty darn competitive?
Yeah, it's interesting. They might not be the highest paying jobs there in 1997, but they were in high demand because it's really interesting work in an interesting place, interesting industry. You kind of go into broadcast mode, broadcast what you're looking for and listen for signals back if there's something that's there. And I just remembered through my Chicago network, through family friends, one of the owners of the resort had lived in Chicagoland. It was a former McKinsey gentleman, and it helped at least get a connection outside of the resume, and then when I got the chance to interview, then it was up to me, right? So I think the network connection is only as good as maybe the connection. Then you have to deliver, and it turns out that, it must have been a good enough interview that they gave a 21-year-old kid a cool job.
I think this is critical, right? We say, even when you're looking for jobs, how do you stand out? And I think with the feedback that we get from all of our clients is, we open a role up and we get overnight 400 applications. How on earth are you managing to stand out when you do that? And it really comes down often just figuring out a way to stand out on LinkedIn, figuring out a way to get your foot in the door, figuring out a connection. You don't even need to have a connection. You just need to make a little effort. But I love the idea of strength of weak ties too, right? So many people we know have gotten jobs through asking, and somebody saying, you know what? I think I know somebody who used to work here, or owns this, or vacations there and might be able to help you. That networking piece is so critical. And I think what's amazing about what you talked about too is you're going into marketing when I think with late 90s, early 2000s, when there was a massive shift in the way that people were marketing, right? This is really us moving off of print and billboards and things like that onto the scary world of digital. What was that like?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting because I think I was attracted to marketing for all the disciplines within marketing in terms of what it was in sort of the early and mid 90s. As digital as marketing was getting at that time was really thoughtful, deep database marketing. So eventually it would manifest in some print deliverable, like a mailer or a catalog or whatever it might be. But underlying, there was a lot of data work going on in customer segmentation. And that's kind of where I started. I think like an early program like Fox Pro or something like that. But it was right at that transformation where web went from just like flat HTML pages to like, hey, what if we could actually wire these things to databases, wire them to commerce engines? And so the whole thing kind of flipped right there. And it was an interesting industry to be in during that transformation. You have like hotel syndication, a Marriott, a Sheraton. What are their booking systems? What are those integrations? And then across the resort, there's a lot of different things going on in terms of, marketing of those services, doing content, distributed content management within the resort to actually put the power of marketing and authoring into the hands of those different businesses within the resort sort of holding companies.
So you got the job, you climbed the corporate ladder, and then you scooted out to get your MBA. I think there's so many people who think, should I go and get another degree? Should I go and get another level of higher education? Was getting that MBA the right move for you? And how did you realize that that was worth it?
At that time, it felt like it was just a no-brainer. I was going to do it. The best marketing problems at that time were tech problems. So I ended up going back and working for a tech subsidiary of a bigger consulting firm in Chicago. And so marketing brings me to technology. Technology brings me to consulting. And it's as I was in that point where I'm like, all right, I don't know exactly where I want to go. I know I like technology. I know I like the application of technology for clients. But I really felt like, boy, I really need a broader perspective. But there's certainly this branding element, which is, all right, we're kind of certifying you is not being a ski bum knucklehead. Great. For me, it was really about, okay, I think I understand, enough about marketing, not all of it, but like that's kind of my domain. And I'm getting into tech and consulting and I'm starting to deal with more client engagement, but I really need to understand the entire functioning ecosystem of a business. It was sort of this grounding I thought I needed to help me in my career.
I think after your MBA, then that led you to IBM. And I think the question I have, right, is do you feel like that was a critical part? Like you had the MBA, now you kind of had one, the experience of doing great things. Two, you had the credibility of the MBA. Do you think that's what helped you get that job at IBM? Did it go back to your networking abilities? How did that kind of come together?
Getting the job at IBM was definitely a mix of MBA, top business school, with a really strong placement program. So they do all the work to get you in front of the IBMs, Microsofts, Googles, I'm kind of thinking of the companies at that time, and you can secure interviews and do that. At the same time, I had a friend who was from Harvard Business School who was active at IBM, and that's where he went after Harvard. He had been in various leadership roles there. I sort of back channeled with him to really understand what these kind of roles were. And then there's a whole set of meetings set up with IBM's consulting practice, with IBM sales and distribution and general management teams. And then meanwhile, there's this more formal process. And those two things came together with an offer there. And it was really interesting. And a part of me had thought, oh, Danny, you're smart enough to be a management consultant. Most of the people in my network were like, I think you're more the sales general management track. Go lead people, go get experience from a big company where you can learn that, and then decide if you want to go somewhere smaller or different.
This is where I think everybody is trying to make the connection, right? So you've been a marketer for some time and now you're at a CRO now and you have been for over 7 years at Morningstar. How did we bridge that gap, which really happened at IBM? This is where you made the transition into, as every marketer cringes, into the sales role, joining the dark side of sales. How did you decide to make that transition? Because I think for you, it all comes back to the customer and being close to the customer, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting discovery because careers are not necessarily linear, in terms of the exact job type, exact sector, et cetera. But I think some of the threads that excite you and develop you in your career can be linear and you don't know it. And so while I'm hopping around from like, okay, wait, you're in Vermont, then you're in the resort industry, and now you're over, at a small tech firm in Chicago, then you're doing this, now you're at IBM. It might not make sense, but if you follow sort of the content thread, it's like, all right, interested in marketing. Okay, the best marketing is technology-enabled marketing. Go and work at a firm that's doing tech stuff. And then while I was doing tech consulting, I found that being in front of clients was my favorite part of it. It was like both interesting, challenging, nerve-wracking at times, but I also felt like I had some natural abilities there. And then all of a sudden, I'm now doing for the entire firm most of the business development pitches. And that's when I'm in business school part-time. And I'm like, wait a minute, I really love doing business development. And so then as I'm leaving business school, that's where I'm thinking that through, which is like, should I go this consulting track, or do I really like the idea of kind of sales and then the sales path into general management? And that's when I landed on like, what are some world-class sales companies? And certainly at that time, IBM was one of them. It was just a wonderful place to grow your career. So what was an individual contributor sales role, then became a team lead, then became a go-to-market lead for a specific part of the business. Then, hey, how about go lead IBM business in Wisconsin? Do you mind kind of living up there during the week? And it just kept gradually moving into broader general management, but always sort of at the center of client, which is where marketing is coming together, sales is coming together, and then client service and delivery. And I felt like I had some incredible mentors, some awesome peers. That's a great training ground to see how, at that time, like how does a 400,000 person, $100 billion company make this all work? There were great options to stay if you'd wanted, but that's when I started thinking, people close to me were like, you might be more effective and maybe even more excited in a smaller business where you could actually work with a tighter leadership team and really see the results of your efforts and drive it.
I think something about you that I'm going to guess, right? So you're moving from a marketing role into sales where you truly have no true sales experience, right? As an individual contributor, and then going into as a leader. I'm guessing that you do what we try to teach every seller that comes through samsales to do, which is to show up to solve, not to sell. So you do your research, you've got your arsenal of information in advance, you understand the buyers, the business, the challenges, and then you come and just say, how can we be of help? What are your challenges? What are your priorities? What do you focus on? Here's the narrative of what we're hearing from clients that look like you. That's what I feel like you're probably naturally good at. And if we show up to solve, we're going to naturally sell. Hopefully it's our services. If not, we can find somebody to refer. But do you feel like that's what made you so strong without that maybe traditional sales background?
That is definitely how I still think. My father-in-law gave me great advice. He was another Harvard business grad, and he worked at one of the premier management consulting firms. In their pitches, they never talk about themselves. In fact, the company name isn't there until the appendix where they list a couple partners' names. And instead, what they do is, here are the trends that we see. Here are our perspectives on those trends. And then from those perspectives, here are sort of our insights and our capabilities to help solve those. And by the way, here's evidence that we're doing that with some really interesting companies and having success. I just spent a whiteboarding session with a talented marketer here at Morningstar, and we were just kind of talking through that narrative. Let's not lead with capabilities. Let's certainly not lead with product names. Now, certain motions might have that. Demand gen to lead, write to someone, demo the product, fine. But for some of our executive audiences and some of our large clients, we're really trying to lead with understanding, knowledge and thought leadership, and then bridging to those, those client experiences that we had that give us a position to say, we can help you. Then you can get into speeds, feeds, products, and get to demos. You have to show up and understand and be credible.
I think somewhere along the way, we hit kind of a speed bump and changed the way we did it, right? We had so much product-led growth and companies that were disrupting the space. So all these orders were coming in, and we kind of got accustomed to talking about ourselves, showing our NASCAR slide, as Todd Capone, if you follow him in Chicago, as he always talks about, where you just show all the logos you work with. Nobody cares about that, right? They'll care about that eventually. They want to know that you have a stable company and you have good founders. But first and foremost, they want to know, what can you teach us? How can you solve our challenges? What should we be doing that we're not thinking of? We're trying to shift so much of that in the sales landscape to get people to say, just show up to solve these problems. Come prepared, come educated, show your buyers that you know them, their space, who they are as humans, who they are as a company, et cetera, and come with that education, right? Because just saying, this is what we do, do you want some of it, probably isn't going to cut it unless their house is on fire and they really need it. I want to ask you something real quick about Morningstar and how you got here. And then I want to shift to some great sales questions for our audience as well.
Sure.
But what I think I find interesting about probably where you were back then is you look like so many executives that we work with at samsales, specifically on our LinkedIn executive branding line of business. They are executive vice presidents. They are senior vice presidents. They manage billion-dollar P&Ls, but they haven't hit the C-suite yet. And they're thinking, how do I get there? What do I do? I'm not going to hit the easy apply button on LinkedIn. How do I get visible enough to get recruited away at some point? How did that happen for you with Morningstar?
At that time, actually, Morningstar was a client of IBM. We had teams calling on Morningstar, and And I knew a friend who I kind of met through some of that, became a pretty close friend. And then I remember he called me August. I got back from a nice fly fishing trip in Montana, and he was calling me. I actually thought it was to come back together maybe on an opportunity. And he said, no, actually, we're looking for a chief revenue officer, our first one at Morningstar. We've had sort of VPs of sales and other things. And we've looked at a lot of people from industry. And they said, but we're actually interested maybe someone from outside of financial services technology, and maybe you'd be a good fit. And that was how I got introduced. And then we met for a couple of months, kind of working through that. I'd say the important part of that process is I feel like you got to be authentic, right? In representing who you are, just as I think companies, do their best to be authentic in the opportunity they're representing. It just because that way there's fewer surprises and you're trying to mitigate risk for both. I just tried to paint the picture of here's what I do bring to the table, kind of a self scorecard. Like I think I'll be pretty good in these 3 or 4 pillars. If you're looking for someone in these specific pillars, that's not me. And we shouldn't be surprised by that in like 6 months. We can address those gaps, but just if you think those are like leading strengths coming in, we should be pretty clear about those.
I'm going to name drop Todd Capone for the second time on this and his whole transparency sale methodology, but he talks about that, like be upfront. This is what I am. This is what I'm not. Here's why you might want the things that I'm not, but that honesty is so rare across the board, recruiting, how we interview for jobs, sales, especially, but what a win it can be.
Transparency in sales. I mean, that is a really rich discussion with the client. Like, why don't we do some discovery? And let me tell you what we're very good at. But let's also be clear, these other areas, like we might not be leading, but let's talk about that. Or if you want something totally off the grid from what we do, like, let's be clear about that now so that, we're being thoughtful of your time and your outcomes. I think that goes a long way.
There's even a transparency in that and going above and beyond, which we really pride ourselves on trying to always do for our customers and our non-customers alike, and say, even if you don't pick us, if you'd like to spend some time with us deciding between who you are going to pick in the end, we're happy to give you some unsolicited feedback, what we hear in the space, what to look out for, how to negotiate things. And I think people are always like, why the hell would you do that and spend time with us? And it's to delight the customer. It's also just a perfect segue to what I know is important to you, which is kind of the idea that relationship sales isn't dead.
I'm not sure if it was an HBR piece or something a number of years ago where there was a bold statement, which I like provocative, bold statements, they get people thinking, which is good. And I think it was like relationship sales is dead or something. If I unpack that, like from my perspective, I actually think I know what they were getting at. In my interpretation, what I really think is happening is like relationship only sales is dead. As I've thought about it through different chapters of my career, I think first and foremost is you have the competencies, right? Whether those are technical sort of product competencies about the industry and the audiences you're serving. Those competencies make you therefore credible. The clients, I think they will only spend time with credible people these days. You have to be credible and competent, and you have to have information and context. But once you have that, I think any company, whether they're manufacturing John Deere tractors or they're writing lines of code, all they are is a collection of people. We might get confused because like their machines doing injection molding or there are other things, it's all driven by humans. And so companies are just a collection of humans in different competencies and categories and functions that are coming together to do work. Their surrounding ecosystem of partners in the supply chain or customers, it's all just collections of humans. So to say that relationship sales is dead for me didn't resonate. In fairness, I think I understand at least how I can contextualize that. But the days of sort of empty suit, 18 holes of golf, I don't see how that really has a place in the future. I do think a highly competent, credible seller, customer success rep, et cetera, well-armed in industry, product knowledge, client knowledge, and selling skill, then they come alive with relationship to build bridges to other humans. I think that's the differentiator.
I completely agree with you. And I think that the relationship alone isn't going to get you. And the relationship alone isn't going to get you also because the buying landscape has changed so much, right? And there are so many people, especially as you rise in enterprise organizations, that are involved in the buying process. So even if I have a fantastic relationship with Danny Dunn probably doesn't make decisions in a vacuum, right? Because he's a great leader and he's going to rely on his team to say, what do you think? What should we do? And get those inputs before ultimately making the decision. So it's not just that relationship sale. But I think what's interesting is, part of what we talk about all the time, as you know, is show me, you know me, right? And we say to people, make the investment in the person, right? So who are they? Where did they grow up? Where did they go to school? Do you have common connections? If you met them at a conference, what could you figure out on their LinkedIn profile to small talk about them with? And it's not like, hey, I see you went to Kellogg. Cool. It's, I see you went to Kellogg, and you've got to connect the dots. You've got to take it a step further. And I think it always surprises people, right? They say, well, Danny doesn't care if I went to Kellogg and I have things to say about that. And I'm like, he probably does if you have something interesting or common professors or something to say about it. Don't forget that these people you're selling to don't just have wallet share. They are human beings who want to build relationships, who want to form rapport.
And I think you nailed it in some of your early points on this, which is relationship sales isn't dead. I've got to show up. I'm competent. I'm credible. Now I've got to connect. I feel like you got to dig deep in it though, because to some degree, if you only go an inch deep on personalization, it might hurt you more than no personalization. Danny, I saw Northwestern beat Miami, Ohio in the opening football game. All they did was look at LinkedIn. They're like, all right, Northwestern, let's try that. Without the extra effort to take personalization a bit deeper, personalization becomes generic. And in fact, I think personalization might actually be at a disadvantage.
I don't even want to know what your inbox looks like every single day with the sales messages that you get 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 every day. And they all have the most generic subject lines, I'm sure. And the ones that crack me up too is when they send you an email that does look personalized and it's like, Sam, I'm intrigued by what Sales is doing. And I respond, I'm like, what intrigues you? And of course, they don't write back ever because they're like, whatever. But I think we try to do this, right? I call it scaled and veiled, right? We try to scale our outreach efforts. We use ChatGPT. We veil it and make it look like it's something that we did. For every sales leader that thinks about volume, we still need to do volume. Volume's king instead of quality. I say, well, what happens when you have a rep that uses Gemini or ChatGPT, somehow hoodwinks, because that's what we love to do with our buyers. We want to trick them into meeting with us, tricks Danny into a meeting. And then Danny's like, oh my gosh, tell me about the Miami of Ohio game. Did you watch it? And the rep's like, oh God, scrambling to figure out what Danny's talking about because they didn't read the email. They just took the meeting and went for it.
There's an interesting element for, at least I'm looking at myself as the buyer now and people approaching me and how I think about my own teams and how we approach buyers. But topic specificity is an interesting one. And it's a bit of a range. Like I'm going to go really narrow or I'm going to go broad when I approach Danny Dunn to see if he wants to meet with me. If they really know what's going on and they go narrow, my God, that is probably the perfect outcome because they're like, this is on his top 3 priorities. They are working on this right now. They're struggling here. He's getting ready to start talking to the vendor community. So if you go narrow and you get it right, wow, that's the home run. If you go narrow and you miss, it's gone. Whereas I see broad ones actually can work. And I just received one recently. They gave me a teaser of the content and it was related to a CRO, Chief Commercial Officer study on a couple data points within there that I thought were broadly interesting and it was a credible firm. And I was like, I'm going to open that, and if that gal happens to be in town, I would totally connect with her over coffee to kind of hear a little bit more about what they're doing there. So I find that spectrum to be pretty interesting, but first you have to have done your homework.
I think 2 things that we talk about at Sam Sales. One, how you even get that email opened, right? So that subject line really has to stand out. But then 2, it's the content. And we teach how to do this. We teach enablement teams how to put together the whole sequences and sales off and outreach and all of that. Every single one that we look at when we start to pull apart their process, it says, this is what we do. Do you want some of it? And what you just said is the exact opposite of that, right? We have to teach, we have to educate. It's not just about, we can help you do this because the buyer can say, we already have that, delete. We have to make sure that there's something valuable and that we also think about the hidden or forthcoming objection. What are they going to object to in their minds and then delete? I think one thing that was critical that you said, and you may not even remember saying this, but years ago when you and I met, you said someone may do all of the effort of reaching out to me, right? Get me to open the email and treat me. Before I say yes to the meeting, I'm going to go to their LinkedIn profile and see who they are, who they know, what their, picture looks like. Are they, with a bunch of buddies having beers or do they look professional? Is time with this person going to be well spent? Their email was good, but let me trust but verify. Do you still feel that way?
100%. I still cred check anyone on LinkedIn, period. That is the first thing I do. Hundreds of these come a day, but occasionally it's a really reputable firm with a timely topic. And I do try and keep myself educated. When those things come through and I look at it, I'm like, okay, who is this person? And then I'll look and it's not like it's all about their title and how maybe senior or junior they are. It's just sort of like, what are they doing? Where have they been? How are they educated? Who else might we be connected to together? So that is integral for me.
To me, I think the sales process is all these puzzle pieces. And I think we sometimes do one and we forget the 9 others that are critical, right? So we might have hit the nail on the head and gotten an open, a read, multiple opens and a read. But then our LinkedIn profile is so bare bones or non-existent. We look dead, or worse, you think we're a bot now because we don't exist on LinkedIn. Let me ask you final question we ask all of our guests. If a person wanted a meeting with Danny Dunn, they wanted to get a meeting with you, sell you something, ask you for mentorship, get a promotion, anything, How do they do it?
Yeah, maybe the best way I can do this is through like a good recent example. So it was multiple touches, and it was eventually the one on LinkedIn that I thought was pretty good. First, real simply, here's who I am. Then immediately went to, I work with a former coworker of yours from IBM, and named that person. And they must have fact checked with that person, because that person and I did know each other and had a good working relationship. So did homework there. Reference that this individual had already had a couple of other discussions with Morningstar people and named them by name. Reference that he had heard my comments in the annual shareholder meeting. And then finally, just quickly reference, like, I'm working with similar firms, even competitors, on these types of topics. And here's even a quick link to some information that was like, not like burying me with like a 70-page deck. And I was like, all right, this person's been persistent and tried me a couple times. They did thoughtful homework, and it all came together. And I thought, wow, that was a good approach.
This is amazing. So would you say, Danny, that they showed you that they knowed you? We're going to go with that. We're going to go with that. But that's
showed
critical.
me that you knowed me. Yeah.
We're real professional around here.
I like that. I thought for sure. And the only step better you could maybe do, which I do see, is someone will go through their network and say, I see that you're connected to Danny. Would you sponsor an introduction to me? Those have a high hit rate. And I like when they do it without just CCing the person right away, but they'll say, hey, Danny, I'm really close with this individual. They've done some work. They're keen to meet you. Would you be okay with me brokering that or not? 9 times out of 10, I say, yeah.
Let's hit on 3 just critical things really quick. So number 1, what could they have done better? Absolutely gone through that person at IBM first. So it sounds like they probably fact checked, like you said. Do you guys know each other? Can I reference your name? Thanks. But instead, I would have said, can you introduce me, right? Just speed to lead and speed to trust, because it's coming from that person. 2, if they said, you can use my name, but I just don't have the time to do it, best of luck. I would have put that name front and center in the subject line of the email, right? First hit probably gotten you. And the other thing that I want to think about is what you just said there, right? Not a top priority right now, maybe not what I'm looking at this very moment, but just by making the effort, this person was able to get a response, potentially a meeting, but a response from the chief revenue officer at Morningstar, which I bet there are 150 other people that have emailed you this week that would kill for that chance. And if they only made the effort, they might get it. So just the power of that, right? You responding, and even if you said, love the email, not right now, the door is open. And also kudos to this person for multi-threading their way all throughout the organization, all the way up to the top. I'll stop talking now. This was so great, though. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I just kind of get going, but hopefully you have some content to work with.
Loved this episode and loved getting to connect with Danny again so very much. A few things that I learned from our discussion. 1, seeking out ways to learn enables growth. Danny was always looking for the next challenge, the next way to elevate his skill set, whether that meant going back to school or changing his role completely. He didn't shy away from pivoting as long as he could use it as education. I love that perspective. Also, relationships matter more than almost anything. How did Danny land his first job? By looking through his network. How did he move from one company to the next and eventually into the position of chief revenue officer? People like to work with him, so they referred him, or they recruited him, or they helped him make the right move. Your network is your net worth, as I always say. I know it's cliche, but it's really important. Remember that. And how do you nurture that network? Did somebody say, show me you know me? You nailed it. And now, drum roll, please. Let's do some Sam spilling. Here's a question from Mason in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Do you think there are specific stages of a deal where video outreach would make a bigger impact than others? Ooh, great question. So I think a couple of things. And I will tell you, as you guys listen to these podcast episodes and you listen to any of the advice that I give, the first thing I would tell you is 1, there are no silver bullets in sales. And 2, you have to do what's right and authentic for you. So take a little of my advice, take a little from others, take some from books you read, mix it all together, and that's your sales process. Now, when we think about video, I personally don't like it when we use it in prospecting efforts. We've all seen it, right? Or maybe we've all done it. We do a little video, we hold up a sign, we say, hey, Sam, I made a video for you. So it looks custom, right? And then we send that out. When I get those videos, I think 2 things. 1, when I see that sign, I always think somebody's being held, for ransom, like they've been kidnapped, and that's my one chance to get to free them. But 2, I also know that they're looking at exactly how much of the video I watch and exactly when I'm doing it. And so I don't watch them because I suspect I'm going to get a phone call right away. Now, where I do like video is as an explainer. And here's a great thing you can do. Consider that we sometimes get into situations where we've gone through a sales cycle, we put a proposal together, and then that proposal is maybe going to be shared with a larger committee, decision committee, buyers committee, maybe a board. So what do we do to personalize that presentation? Instead of just sending a PowerPoint attachment or the links that you have to access, consider doing that, but also bringing a video in. It's a great chance for you to introduce yourself to the organization, to talk a little bit about the proposal, and maybe leave some closing remarks around timing, negotiations, etc. I love it as a differentiator as well, because your competitors are all just going to send their presentations, right? Their proposals, and call it a day. You are going to do that, but you're going to turn up the notch a little bit on that show me you know me, on that extra effort, and make it a bit more compelling. Ooh, I love this next question. This is from Carrie in Boise, Idaho. What's the biggest sales mistake you've made? Ugh, and what did you learn from it? Oh my gosh, how much time do you guys have? Trusting a friend to sign a $582,000 contract that never gets paid? No, just me, just me. I will tell you one of the many, many, many mistakes I have made in sales. And one of those is being too reliant on relationships to close a deal versus doing the standard processes as a challenger seller and making sure that I really had all my ducks in a row for a deal to close. Let me give you an example. We have a lot of sellers out there who are relationship sellers, and they're actually the worst kind of sellers. What it means is that they rely on those relationships to get those deals closed. So they don't ask the questions that they have to ask, like, what's the procurement process like? What's the signing process like? Can you help us understand exactly who's involved in the buying process? Do you have budget signing authority, or do we need to present to somebody else? These seem like very, very common questions to ask, but they are also very, very common questions that don't get asked because people rely on the relationships and say, oh, I don't have to have those uncomfortable conversations. It'll just work itself out. So that was me in the early days because I was new to sales and I didn't know quite what to do. I didn't know I could even ask those questions. So I wish I'd learned sooner that at the end of the day, we both work for businesses and we both have goals. Their goal is to bring us in. Our goal is to sign the deal. That if they're experienced buyers, they're also experienced at getting these questions. So it's totally okay for us to ask them. That's it for me today, except to say thank you again to Danny Dunn for bringing such great charisma to our show. I'd once again like to thank Courtney Garcia, our producer of the show, and Paige Tills. And I want to thank our growing audience who continues to support Sam Sales across all the spaces and places we like to hang. Our theme music is a song called All at Sea by the artist Zediel. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And if you want to stay up to date on all events and resources coming from Sam Sales, our newsletter is a great resource for that as well. You can find links in the show notes on this episode. That is all. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll talk to you again soon.